Welcome to Menopause Reimagined. I'm your host, Andrea Donsky. I'm a nutritionist for more than 18 years who's in menopause. I'm a menopause educator, menopause researcher, and I'm the co-founder of wearemorphus.com. Today, I have a very special guest. She is in all the way from Dubai, and we never met in person, but we've been friends for several years, and I'm very excited for you to meet her. Her name is Ann Marie McQueen, and she is a journalist, and I'm going to let her do the honors of introducing herself. Now, here's Ann Marie. Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to do it a little bit differently because I have a very special guest. I'm here with Ann Marie McQueen, and it is the first time that we met in person. So we've been friends for several years now.
Yeah.
Like
Virtual friends.
Virtual friends?
Almost 3, maybe 2.5 or something. I can't remember how we connected.
Probably TikTok, social media, somewhere.
Yeah, but I just, I can't remember how it went past like one comment to like talking to talking a lot to having a summit together. Like I can't really trace it.
I know, me neither. I can't. It's all a whirlwind. But so regardless, Ann Marie and I are meeting for the first time, which is very exciting. And I'm happy to have her back on the podcast because you haven't on before. And I had you on once before. It was so long ago.
Okay.
I'll link to it below. I hope I did. Now I'm like thinking I'm not questioning it. But so let's get started. What are we talking about today? Actually, first, introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are and what you do and why you're so awesome.
Oh, I'm so awesome because my name is Ann Marie McQueen. I'm a Canadian journalist. I live in the Middle East, just happened to live in the Middle East. I moved over there in 2008. I've been covering health and wellness and all sorts of things for 30 years now, but focusing on health and wellness in the last 15 or so. And like a lot of women had a really crazy perimenopause that I didn't know was perimenopause until I was 48. So like 6 years of just mayhem and thinking I was dying most of the time and also having tons of emotional symptoms. And then when I missed a period, I was like, oh, and then found out about perimenopause and then just thought I started trying to find information because I'm a journalist and I just hated the content. It was bad. Like the content was dull or it was just written to have search engine optimization. So it said vaginal dryness in it like 28 times. When there's when you click on an article and you're like, this article will be great. And then you read it and you're like, this has nothing in it.
Yes.
Or like fear mongering Daily Mail type stuff. You're losing. And I was coming up to a point in my life where I was feeling like full of ideas. And like I had all this extra stuff in me based on all the wisdom that I'd accumulated. And so I just thought I'm going to do it myself. And then of course the pandemic. So I just started with a newsletter and then went from there.
I love it. It's so amazing.
It's pretty cool. I did not bargain for meeting such cool women all around the world. And I've kind of been on a little menopause tour because I went to an event in New York, the Peri event. They're a very popular social media account and they have a podcast. So I met so many incredible women that I've been talking to like you. And then the next night I went to Omashad Bernie Scott runs Black Girl's Guide to Menopause. And she's been doing all these talks. So I went to Harlem and met a whole bunch of people there. So now I just have to go to the UK and meet other people. But
Australia, New Zealand. Yeah. That's another one of my things I want to.
Jennifer Harrington. And I know Kirsty Holland in Melbourne. I mean, Lara Bryden in New Zealand. I did not factor in this at all. And I think about that book by Louise Hay, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I read it once when I was visiting my brother in a day. And she says, all we can think of is the bad things that will happen or the things that will go wrong when you're doing something new, but we never think of the goodies. And so I couldn't have imagined like sitting here and meeting you and meeting Randy. And it's just really cool.
So Ann Marie, I want you to talk about and I know what you do as a journalist. You're very much into understanding the truths and understanding kind of digging deeper into certain parts of menopause, very different than what I speak about, which is why you and I are constantly chit-chatting and talking and conversing. And I'd love you to share some of the things that you have found that, in doing your research that you'd like to share with our community, like, okay, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about it openly.
Well, what I notice, and we see this all in all realms, is that there's a narrative and then there's the truth. And I had someone say to me recently, you're looking for the true truth. I think it was in the movie Cloud Atlas and Tom Hanks' character says, looking for the true truth. And I was like, that's it, because it's very hard to find when there's a lot of competing agendas. So I just really like to get past all those stories that are repeated all over social media and in the media and say, hey, actually, this part is true. That part is true. For example, the Women's Health Initiative study, the 2002 study that had some results that were scary, that show that there were cardiovascular risks and breast cancer risks.
Yeah.
That study, people will say that study has been debunked.
Right.
And this is just one little piece where it's like, okay, a part of that study was debunked. A lot of data came out of that study.
Right.
And if you ever want to really dive deep in that, Dr. Joanne Manson, who was the principal investigator.
Out of 13, there were 13 of them.
Right. Just such a learned woman. And one of the most cited women was on Peter Attia's podcast. And I would die to talk to her. But then you get a sense of how much data has come out of that study, aside from the part that was pushed everyone to be fearful and go off estrogen. And now there's such a push to get everyone back on hormone therapy that it's okay to say that study was debunked. But when I hear that, I'm like, to say that is so wrong. And I think also damaging because people just don't understand. So that's just kind of one example of the kind of thing that I look at, but also when I hear people say, we didn't used to go through menopause, we used to die at 50. Menopause is only 100 years old. I see this every week. And I think that's a really damaging narrative as well, because do you really think we were created to be on this earth and we died at 50, but men lived to 80? Like, it makes absolutely no sense when you just stop and think about it. But I understand it because it's a very convenient argument for we should all be on hormone therapy, because obviously we used to die at 50. Now we're living beyond 50 in this deficient state, and the deficiency state and the disease state and the direct line from menopause to disease. These are things that I just like to burrow into, but they're really nuanced. And I know I would be so much bigger on Instagram after 3 years. I would have so many more social media followers if I would pick a side. Do you know what I mean?
So you're more of that, you're asking questions. So it's not like you have one belief or another, or I mean, obviously in some cases you do, but it's more of that neutrality of let's start asking questions.
Yeah. And people will say, someone said to me on Instagram, I get the sense that you're anti-hormone therapy. And I said, 100% not. If there's anything I'm anti, it's narratives. And by that, I mean things that aren't correct being used to create an agenda to push people towards something that may or may not be right for them. I just don't think that does anyone any good, but our world is full of them. So
having been in the health and wellness space for a long time, so I've been in the menopause space now for 6 years, but I've been in the health and wellness space for 23, so really long time. And throughout my career and my journey, I've come across some incredible people who've given me some of that, some of the more inside scoop about things that happen. And we saw the same thing in the health and wellness industry when we were pushing a certain way of eating or a certain thing to take or a certain thing not to take. And I think that asking questions is really important. And I think it's really good. And we're also individual. So what works for me may not work for you and the next person, right? And I think asking the questions keeps the conversation going, because once that conversation stops, that's where we get into trouble. And I know even on my TikTok page, there are people like when I post something about symptoms, let's say, and then someone will come in and go, the only way to stop this is through X. And that really gets me upset, because there isn't only one way to stop anything. There are, there's no, and I say this a lot. I say there is no panacea, regardless of what it is. There's no supplement, there's no, whatever it is, there's no panacea. And and especially when it comes to menopause, I really feel there's that toolbox. And in that toolbox, we have nutrition, which, by the way, everybody should be looking at: nutrition, lifestyle. Those are the two things. If you're going to do anything, those are the things we want to start with. Then we can look at supplements. Then we can look or go to hormones, however it is you want to do it. But we have to ask the right questions. And I know this is something I know that really irks you, and as it does me, is that when we look to one person as the answer for everything.
Yeah. What I think, obviously, we've lived our lives. This is the midpoint. Hopefully it's the midpoint. I mean, I hope to live another 35. I'm not one of those people who wants to live to be 120, but I hope I live another good 30 years. Obviously, we've lived huge, full, rich lives. So we've gotten here. Great things have happened. Some not great things have happened, and we've all dealt with them to a degree. We're getting smashed between like aging parents and kids, whatever's going on in your life. It's a really stressful time, and people just want to solve it like they've solved other things. They just want no one wants to face the really big job of being in midlife. That's how I feel. And it's not just about your physical symptoms. It's about like getting your head around how long you've lived, that you're only have this, facing your mortality, accepting that maybe you didn't make the best choices in this area of your life, but you did in this area. And so when there's too many pieces, that it's like makes people crazy. They just want to get back to where I always see people want to get back to some mythical day when they were like 37, when they looked great and they felt great and everything was fine. It's like not a simple situation. And like you said, people want a panacea. So when it comes just to hormone, symptoms that people have, it's like, just, I want to fix it. And then I want to get on with my life. I don't want to have to address any of these things, but I believe we've got 90% of our subconscious, like pushing stuff up at us, that some of it does need to be addressed. And then some of it is emotional. And so my fear is often that people will go on hormone therapy and not face these things. And then also it's becoming more and more apparent that if you have really severe menopause symptoms, like really severe hot flashes, really severe night sweats, that these can indicate underlying health problems. That if you don't pay attention to them, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen, but you need to sort of pay attention to them, and then you can go on and be a healthy, happy old lady. But I get sort of nervous about people slapping on hormone therapy, continuing to drink too much, continuing to be in relationships that aren't good, continuing to work in a job that's sucking the life out of them, or not facing their adverse childhood experiences, or all the things that we need to face at this time in life. But see how I make everything really complicated?
But at the same time, it makes a lot of sense, because we talk a lot about doing the work. And my mom and I, so my mom, as I on my TikTok page, and I refer to her a lot, she is a social worker, master social worker, works with survivors of trauma. And that's what's been her life work. So we do a lot of TikToks around that about doing the work. And doing the work is hard. It is really, really freaking hard. And when you start opening up these wounds, but for many of us, as we get into this stage of life and our kids move out, like in my case, I have younger kids, and a lot of us, many of us had kids in our 40s, or if you didn't have any children, that you get into this phase where now we're more alone and we have more time to think. And, so it gets a little bit tough that we're then faced with these things that come to us. And when we don't address them and we suppress them, it just makes things worse.
Oh my God, it absolutely does. And that's why I said people started going kind of crazy in their 40s, like in my social circle, but I think that's what's happening, because it's like a lid on a pot that you just can't keep on because it's boiling over. So it's just really important to it. I call it the heroine's journey, because you're being called, or the hero's journey, that's at the heart of every film or book. It's the arc where the hero is called to a journey, to an adventure, and they don't want to go. And then if you go, it's tough, and you learn a lot about yourself, and you have dark nights of the soul, and you have setbacks, you meet cool people along the way, but it is worth it, because why else are we here?
Yeah.
But I get a lot of pushback on this kind of thing. And there are women who say to me, like, I by no means am against hormone therapy. These are tools, right? Like I have had to change. I've had a lifelong of IBS, and it's been a real journey getting my gut fixed. I still I take progesterone. I still probably will go on some hormone therapy, but I just feel like that is one tool in the toolbox. And the people that I respect the most, and who are on my expert panel, and who I turn to, and who I work with, are the people who recognize this. Very, very smart people who will say it is not enough to just take estrogen. It is not enough to do those things. You have to look at the whole totality of it. But it's kind of two different mentalities, right? Like if you don't want to touch it, I think you're going to have a harder time.
Yeah. It's, and what we recommend doing is speaking to somebody who maybe can help you, finding a good friend that you can, talk with. Ann Marie and I always say we're like pen pals, but we're like the 2023 version of pen pals.
Yeah.
We do voice
notes.
Voice notes.
Voice notes.
So finding someone that you could speak to, journaling, anybody that you could find that can help you deal with a lot of the stuff that maybe you did suppress, or maybe things that are coming up for you now that that you weren't able to before. And like we said, we're acknowledging it's hard. Doing the work is really tough, but it is rewarding too.
Don't you think learning how to just cry is huge? I don't know. Are you a crier?
I cry a lot. I
cry a lot.
I've gone since being in peri and menopause. Like I'll even cry at things that I never ever cried at before, and like that tear me up or that really get to me. So yeah, I'm totally a crier.
But I used to be a real dissociator. And so, I learned that when I was a kid. So there was a long space between the thing that happened and my emotion about it. Like it used to be sometimes a couple of days. And now I noticed the other day something upset me when I was visiting my family, and I cried like right then. I was downstairs and just in frustration and sadness for someone else. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're crying about something that just happened. This is like huge progress. Like, and one thing I learned, because I did do therapy, not knowing about perimenopause for 6 years was really, really hard, because I actually thought every single problem was a serious problem. And I had a lot of panic, but I also had to work through a lot of stuff because I was like trying to get to it,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will complain about that on social media, and I get it, but I also think it was, my journey. But learning to feel my emotions and not suppress them was the biggest thing that I learned, I would say, because I had always not, numbed with exercise, binge drinking, if that hadn't worked during exercise during the week, eating, shopping, whatever you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like running around like a busy, crazy person, work. And I think by the time you get to your 40s, these coping mechanisms don't work anymore. And so learning to just feel my emotions. And by the way, men are going through this too, like I'm single, I've been dating, and I've encountered men that are like really honest about having a really hard time in their 40s. It isn't just perimenopause. It is a being on this earth for a certain amount of time thing.
Yeah.
But in perimenopause and menopause, it's just all like a big noodle soup.
And men do go through menopause, andropause,
Yes.
or male menopause, we call it. I did a great interview with Bryce Wild. I'm going to link to it below. If you haven't listened to that episode, he talked all about what men go through.
Yeah. And I'm starting to talk about that too, because I do think it's interconnected. Like I do think this is sort of low T, like that's, you're hearing low T a lot, right? Low testosterone. I think it's a lot easier to fix their symptoms with low T than it is maybe to fix ours. Like I think ours is a lot more of, I interviewed someone as well, Dr. Quintaneri in the UK, about it. And it's funny because what you hear on social media a lot is people say, if men went through this, it would be fixed. And yes, I know that they just approved an over-the-counter version of Viagra. I know that we don't yet have like a approved, covered by health version of testosterone for us. And that's a crying shame. Like the last attempt went before the FDA in 2004. But I think it's very simplistic to say if men went through this, it would be easy for them. Because to hear Dr. Uri talk about it, he said, look, like men will do anything but talk. Like men are dragged in here by their partners who are ready to divorce them. They're so ashamed from the things that are happening. If they have a low libido, it's like super hard for them.
Yeah.
So there's barriers to everything.
So last year, Rich, my husband, he like had changed completely. He was not the same person. And it just went on for like a year. And I kept telling him, go to the doctor, get your hormones checked. Maybe you're going through male menopause. Like, just go get your hormones checked. And he's like, my hormones are fine. So, typical response from him. And he was like, in the end, he ended up going to the doctor. His hormones were fine. However, what wasn't fine was his vitamin D levels. He was so deficient in vitamin D. And what I was noticing from him is he became this really not nice person. First of all, he was exhausted all the time aside, but he just became really like irritable and not kind anymore. And my husband's like, and also like, he's like the most, we always laugh, like I'm the type A personality and he's like the type, C personality. He's sober, he's chill, he's relaxed. We kind of balance each other out. And he became like very irritable and kind of mean. And I was like, what is going on? Anyways, he took his vitamin D. Within days, can I tell you, within days, he was back to himself. Wow. He was kind again, because vitamin D levels affect your mood.
Okay.
So he was kind, his energy was back. It didn't take long. And now he is so adamant about taking his vitamin D. So if he's like, I don't even have to remind him. Yeah. He's like, I see him, like we keep it over there. Like, and he literally every day he's taking his vitamin D.
Yes,
so he knows how it makes him feel. And it was so interesting just by even getting something like vitamin D levels checked or B. And that's why I'm such an advocate for getting our testing done, because there's something physiological going on that you can fix. And in this case, it was an easy fix. Thankfully. So it's a matter of like, definitely helping. And there's one of my daughter's coaches. He's also right now going through issues with sleep. And I was kind of giving him some advice. And I was saying to him, take magnesium, take certain things. And when I saw him yesterday, I'm like, so are you taking, because he was complaining about his sleep. And I'm like, so are you taking the vitamins? He's like, no, I keep forgetting. So his wife was like, I'm not going to sit and remind him. Like,
Yeah.
he's got to do it himself. I'm like, you are 100% right. He's got to want it badly enough to be able to do it himself. But, you know, it's interesting that a lot of men are definitely going through.
I was just listening to the Smart List podcast on my way.
I love Smart List.
And they were
So
talking
good.
about sleep. Like Sean Hayes was saying, he
Yeah,
wakes up
so
in the
good.
middle of the night, and they were all talking. You could tell they all had problems. And I was like laughing.
Well, Sean Hayes is 53.
50. Yeah.
Yeah,
Geez, I think they're all in their 50s. So yeah, men are having problems sleeping too. It's but the one noteness of the menopause conversation bothers me for that exact reason, because, you know, I've had a constellation of health problems due to my gut. And I think if I just felt that I wanted to sort them out before I went on hormone therapy. And I just wonder, because I think you go on hormone therapy and you will feel better. And it's confusing because it will help. Like, it will help. Estrogen does help your gut. And some of the gut problems we come up against are due to diminished estrogen, right?
so
it's
many
like
of
such
them.
a mind game to talk about it. But I'm preferring to heal everything prior and then see. And we have this window, you know, one of the things that has become quite apparent about hormone therapy is that you have this window of opportunity, and closer to the time of menopause is the best time, and for 10 years. And so, you know, you've got some time.
And even perimenopause, and I hear a lot of talk about in some cases, it's and again, hormones, I always say, is out of my lane. I listen to a ton of information about it, but I'm not an expert on it.
I'm not an expert either. I'm just, you know, I report on what's.
You asked the question. You know a lot more than I do when it comes to hormones, like a lot. But I've tried it myself, and you know, I'm always asking questions. And I even did it prior. I even did it prior to when I was trying to get pregnant.
Right,
like
you
prior
did
to
it even before.
perimenopause. Yeah, I was doing bioidentical progesterone cream for probably 10 years when I had PCOS, so I couldn't get pregnant. So my doctor at the time prescribed it. So I've been on it for many, many years, and I just feel like it's one of those things that, you know, I'm going to keep going back to it, is asking those questions is super important. But I do hear you when you say, you know, maybe what's a good idea is to fix those problems. Now, granted, it could be related to that low estrogen
This
too.
is the confusing thing,
it's
right? Because anytime I say that, and this is why it's like every person is different. Because anytime I'll make a social media post, like, you know, everyone wants to blame everything on perimenopause, but it could be your gut. And someone will write, yeah, but I couldn't heal my gut until I went on hormone therapy. Yeah. I'm a big questioner about your liver now, right? Because I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The liver is so pivotal to all of this. And I know myself, I have non-alcoholic fatty liver, or whatever they're calling it now. And when I started to heal my liver, the hot flashes went way down, right?
So here's the thing about fatty liver and the liver in general. So the liver is our largest detox. Our largest detox organ is our skin. It's the master detox organ in the body. And as we go into perimenopause and menopause, it can actually change by up to like 40% in volume. So it's really important as we go into this phase of life that we really take care of our liver for so many reasons.
Because it's getting smaller, right?
It can change in volume. It gets either way depending, right?
It may be very overloaded and fatty.
So it becomes, because, and again, none of us live in a bubble, right? So we're exposed to things by the food we're eating, walking outside, the air, the products we're putting on our body, which is why I'm such
emotional stuff.
Emotional, huge.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I love that. So it's very important. That's why I'm always advocating for, be mindful of what you're putting in and on your body. Be mindful of your emotions, because anger is the emotion of the liver. Right. So working through those emotions, like we talked about, you know, a couple of minutes ago, working through those emotions is really important, especially for liver health. Right. So when what we put in and on our body is important. And then what we put, you know, what the food that we're eating, what it's covered in, all the pesticides and all that stuff, the herbicides, all those things, the medications that we're on, everything that we're taking in, the supplements, everything affect the liver. So it's really important, because a lot of it gets processed, and certain things don't. Of course, we're always, you know, we're trying to take things to bypass the liver. Certain things bypass the liver, but it's really important that we just be mindful. So doing things like helping, you know, eating bitters really helps the liver. Arugula, dandelion tea. We're drinking our dandelion tea. Artichokes, like, yes. So things like that really helpful to the liver that just help it. It helps with digestion. It helps with liver. So you just want to make sure that dry skin brushing is really helpful too. Anything that's just going to help your body detoxification. Oh, detox. By the way, fiber.
Okay.
What were you going to say?
No, something else after that.
I was going to say fiber, really important, because if you're not going to the bathroom every single day, you're getting backed up, putting more pressure on the liver.
Yeah.
So it's really important that's why, and everything is interconnected, right? So just making sure you're pooping every day. I mean, I talk about that so much. I think people are like, we know Andrea's going to say, make sure you're pooping every day, but it's really important. And if you're not, taking fiber, maybe taking hydrochloric acid, something that's going to help with digestion.
Yeah. Well, I didn't having IBS for so much of my life. And by the way, like paying attention to what's going on in your body. I'm just the kind of person who had IBS for 20 years and chugged coffee and felt tired and didn't know that I was basically malnourished. Since I've been healing all that, I've had the experience of constipation for like the first time in my life, right? Because now I'm not having at that, I don't know, the way I understand, at the mitochondrial level, things are starting to work, but then I'm having sort of the constipation that a lot of people face. So the daily carrot, the daily giant carrot is my fix.
I like it.
And now when I travel, I'm like, I need to find a bag of carrots right away.
That's awesome.
Or to make a carrot salad.
Well, it's very important. That's why we talk about getting 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. How do we get our fiber? Vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts and seeds, complex carbohydrates. That's why it's really important. And then I always say, if you need extra, that's where Fiber S comes in, right? Like it gives you that extra 6 grams of soluble fiber.
Some Fiber S to take with me. I'm excited.
It is the hands down, literally the best fiber in the market. I'm not just because it's ours.
Yes.
But it really is the best fiber because it's soluble. It's a prebiotic. It feeds the good bacteria in our gut. So it's awesome in so many levels.
There's been a lot of discussion about probiotics, and not a lot of people are as familiar with them.
Prebiotics. Yeah. So, and you can get prebiotics from food as well, by the way. You can get it from Jerusalem artichokes. You can get it from garlic, onions, carrots with the peels on. So you're going to wash your carrots really well. Those are prebiotics.
When I was telling my brother all this, I'm like, get the organics, don't peel them. And he's like, if you've been peeling carrots your whole life, this is like heresy. Like what?
But just make sure you wash it really well. It's really important to wash it with veggie wash or vinegar, however, vinegar and baking soda, however you wash it. But it's very important. So I think, and jicama, which is another really yummy one. Asparagus.
That I used to think was jicama.
Jicama. It is so good. It's like my favorite.
Well, I think I've had it once.
Oh, so it's like crunchy and like hydrating, and keep it in the fridge. It's so yummy in the summer. It's like one of my favorite things. But so I think that's all important.
I was gonna talk to you about something that I don't hear very much from the Doctor Menopause Gurus. I have this DMGs.
What are those?
The Doctor Menopause Gurus are the people who with massive followings, kind of like yours, but like who are just sort of now on soapbox. And
these are medical doctors.
Usually. Unchecked often, like no one's sort of checking them. Like I wish there was, I think their medical body should be watching the Doctor Menopause Gurus sometimes. But, giving tons of good information, but all allopathic, all very much medical. It's evidence-based, but with no sort of recognition of the emerging truths of functional and integrative medicine, which we know are often forward thinking, right? Like 12 years ago, people weren't talking about reversing type 2 diabetes and reversing. That was like, what? And probably 15 years ago, if you talked about your gut microbiome, even 10 years ago, people thought you were kind of crazy, right? And now it's everywhere. So what I see is Dr. Menopause Gurus, love them, help in educating so many people, but just not opening because the body of evidence always has to be there, but their body of evidence, like it takes a long time for medicine to change, right?
Always.
I always talk about the hand washing people because people started to notice that there were a lot of seemingly unnecessary deaths back in the day in hospitals. And, someone in Austria and someone in the US would say like, hey, maybe we should start washing our hands after the autopsy before the delivery of the baby, and then that caused an outrage, and people either ignore or ridicule advancements when they first start. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying what I don't hear about is detoxification of estrogen and the pathways. And I'm just learning about this now.
How passionate I am.
You were very passionate about it. And I don't like to talk about things until I really, really know them and speak to enough experts on my podcast.
Yeah, I this is something that I'm so passionate about. I mean, coming from the natural world or the alternative world and having literally, that's where I've lived for 23 years. And I very much love, the balance between the allopathic world and the, the natural world, the alternative world. So for me, it comes down to balance. And we don't talk about in the conventional world, we don't talk about the estrogen metabolites enough. And I've seen, actually, repeat what the word is, your acronym.
DMGs.
DMGs. Okay. So I've seen some DMGs that will say that you don't need to know what your metabolites are. It doesn't matter. And it's just not true. Like, it's just not true. And I've spoken to so many functional medicine doctors and experts that, you know, it is such an important part of the story. Again, we've got stories and we've got puzzles, let's say, and then we've got, you know, these puzzles that we're putting together. And then there's some big pieces that are missing in that puzzle. And you can't complete that puzzle unless you have those pieces, right? And to me, that alternative medicine, the alternative way of thinking are those pieces in some of those conventional thinking. And I do believe that estrogen metabolites are very important. And, you know, so when I hear someone saying that the Dutch test is horrible or don't believe it, or if it's a scam, and I'm like, I've spoken to like triple board certified NAMS practitioners who are on the board of the Dutch company. I've interviewed the Dutch company as well, Dr. Debbie Rice from the Dutch company. And I know that, you know, I've interviewed Cash from the DNA company. I know you're interviewing him. And these are parts of the puzzle that are important to know, because we want to understand how our estrogen's metabolizing, because it can go into the 2, the 4, the 16, right? And we don't want it to go in the 4, 16, because that's where it's an issue. And if you're putting a lot of estrogen into your body, but not knowing how it's breaking down, it could potentially cause issues. So I think that's where it's important to understand those pieces. Those are the puzzle pieces that I feel that we just need to understand.
And when you explain it like that, why would anyone say you don't need to know this? It's very hard to understand, except that it takes a certain amount of time and enough people to change minds from the way things have always been done. So this is an emerging thing. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but I know I'm not going to take estrogen until I know
what your metabolism.
Yeah. And there are some integrative practitioners who say, I don't really need to test. I can tell by how you feel and how your body's functioning. I can kind of tell how you're metabolizing your estrogen, but then there's other people who are like, I do like to test. It's not a scam. It's 100% not a scam, but that's a great social media post. That's a great post that'll play really well.
It's a scam.
Yeah, because think how confusing it is out there. So if I see a doctor that I trust say something is a scam, what a relief. I don't have to worry about it. I've been hearing about this Dutch test. I've been hearing about estrogen metabolizing over here. I don't want it anymore. I've got the kids. I've got all this stuff to do. If you have someone you trust say that's a scam, that's great, right? I can just take that out of my worry
to-do list. But it's also expensive. I mean, that's the other thing too, is these tests cost money. Doing DNA tests, doing the Dutch test, it's
privilege involved.
It costs a lot of money and it's expensive. And that's where I'm like, I just wish it was covered by insurance. I wish it wasn't as expensive. I mean, obviously it costs a lot of money to do it. But having said that, the alternative isn't so great either, right? So we just figuring out a way of how to get it done. But yes, definitely privilege if, you know, from a being able to affordability standpoint, it is expensive. But, you know, hopefully one day this will be part of the medical system. Hopefully people that, you know, will be able to test it at a much more reasonable price. But I do think these are important, especially if you're considering hormone therapy. Go listen to, you know, again, we're going to post it below the interview I did with Dr. Debbie Rice. It was a while ago. I should do another one. And go listen to that interview and listen to what they talk about and how they talk about the importance of it. Now, the Dutch test will tell you in real time what's going on. The genetic testing, like with the DNA company, will tell you what you're genetically predisposed to. I know I'm genetically predisposed to, like my estrogen metabolites going 4 and 16. Okay. So I know that genetically. It's not the case for everyone that is actually in real time doing that. That's why obviously the best of the best is to get both, but again, affordability
is that what you would suggest for the full complete picture? Because I haven't had Dutch in a while and I'm interviewing Cash and I'm going to get the.
If you can, again, it's expensive. I'm going to always bring down the price. I'm going to bring it up the price. So the Dutch test, I mean, it's expensive, but if you can, it's obviously the best way to go about it. But again, it has to do with accessibility and obviously budget, but one of them at least is a good thing to get done.
But just ask yourself, like when I had a fibroid in my 40s, why do I have a fibroid? Why is everyone having a fibroid? Why are all these people having growths? Estrogen makes things grow. And I think this is why, right? You at some point you were detoxifying, or it's part of the reason.
So here's the thing, and you're bringing up a really good point, and this is where my soapbox comes up. And I don't get to talk about this a lot because, like we don't have these conversations, but I think that taking things for the sake of taking things, whether it's hormones, whether it's supplements, whatever it is, taking things for the sake of taking things, but not understanding why, or not understanding how it can affect our body in perimenopause and menopause. I'm not even talking about prior to this stage of life. I'm talking about in this stage of life is so important to understand.
Yeah. Exactly why. And I fall into this trap all the time because I used to think I call myself a recovering journalist because I used to think that if I was seeing trends and spotting trends, and that is one of my talents, just my personal thing is I see connections that aren't there.
That's what you do.
But I also call myself a recovering journalist because some of the things I was seeing and hearing were put there.
Yeah,
they're put there. I've been on the receiving end of press releases for, my entire career. And I can see that I'll get a press release. I'll think, maybe that's a part of story. Maybe I'll follow that up. And then I'll see it in the newspaper, right? Like people are just going with it. So whatever you hear, whatever latest supplement, whatever latest thing, there's always a public relations campaign component to it. And much more so these days because journalism has been cut to the bone and companies have so much money. So, someone I really respect said he can open the New York Times and just point to the stories that come from money, paid. And they're not paid directly. They're paid. It's like you pay the PR company and the PR company's phoning the journalist's busy. Hey, good story. So all that to say, I now am really careful about what I add because the last thing that I added that I didn't really think about that I just took it was turmeric. It's like, okay, my body was really hurting. Turmeric sounds great. All the evidence is great. For me, it was a disaster. I can't really explain what happened. I was feeling really bad. And for some reason, I listened to like a 2-hour Andrew Huberman podcast. And right in the middle of it, he said he can't take turmeric. He said he described why, and I stopped and I don't take it anymore.
So turmeric has a play in genetics. When you speak to Cash and you interview Cash, ask him about turmeric.
Right.
So I can't take it either.
Okay.
But a lot of people can. So, but it is an incredible spice, by the way.
It will go well for a lot of people.
Not us. And that's where it comes down to always listening to your body. So and by the way, there's great research on a lot of different supplement ingredients, like whatever it is, right? There's a lot of great research, but it's always listening to your body, how you feel. Some people can't take magnesium. Some people but for the majority of us, it's good. It's okay. But then listening to your body is really important. If you can, and it doesn't make you feel good. And by the way, it could be the ingredient. And I know we're going to talk about this on your podcast, but it could be the ingredient. It could be the type of where they got it. It could be what's in the actual supplement. It could be the dosage. Like there's so many nuances with supplements, and we're going to dive deep on Ann Marie's podcast. So I just think that, but always listening to yourself at the end of the day is the most important thing.
I also think when you add something new in, and I say this to women about hormone therapy, keep a journal. We're very bad at connecting what we're eating or taking with how we feel. It's so like, it's 2 days later, so much has happened, like all the time. So just start, how do I feel today? I started this on Tuesday and today I had this and today I had this. It's like a food journal, but for whatever you took and all your physical and emotional feelings. And then you'll have a pattern because I'm in this and I can't figure it out just when it's floating around my head.
We created an amazing one.
Oh, did you?
We do. We have an amazing one that we actually created it for a book we're writing.
Okay.
And, but I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you to use, and I'll see if we can link the PDF below. We have one that takes everything into account.
Okay.
But it can be overwhelming too. So if you're like, I don't want to write down everything, just keep notes on your phone. Like if you do whatever that you have the capacity to do, you can even write it on your phone just loosely to see, okay, like I did a talk, this is way back, my son was in grade 5 at the moment, like he's 20 and he's going to third year university, but this was like a long time ago when I wrote on junk food. And I asked his whole class, there were 23 kids in the class, and I said to them, so who chews gum? Everybody raises their hand, whatever the brand name that they were chewing. And then I was like, okay, how many of you get headaches after you chew gum? 50% of them raise their hands. 50% of the kids raise their hands. They knew it. And they knew they get headaches. And I was like, well, it could be the aspartame and the ACE-K and the sucralose that's in the gum. So it's fascinating how our kids they're so in touch with how they feel and what they're doing. So getting better for us is important too. So.
Amazing.
Ann Marie, is there anything else before we end the interview that you want to share with our listeners?
There's this song by the boxer, the name, it's called Love Yourself. Love yourself. Learn to love yourself. Everything will be easier. If I had to do it all over again, I would work on that one thing. And I know everything else, it falls into place slowly but surely. If you just take that one step. That sounds so like mamby-pamby, airy-fairy, but it's essential to put yourself first and to love yourself and to say, what would I do if I think there's a book called What Would I Do If I Truly loved and approved of myself, or something like that.
I think it all comes down to that. And so many of us are working on that all the time. And that's something that I try to instill in my kids all the time. Like, because when you do, there's so many things that stem from that, right? So I don't think it's mamby-pamby or,
And ask questions. Please don't just discern. We have so much inner discernment. Again, when you talked about those kids, we have it. We've just been divorced from it our whole life. So something doesn't seem quite right, but the person saying it is very certain. Sit with it and ask questions. And also if someone's angry, like a sort of, I run the other way.
Oh my God, you're talking about social media. Oh,
I'm talking about social media.
So we talk about this a lot, like the angry posts. I can't even, I tune in. I just can't. I mean, but why when you're trying to share information, why be angry? Like it should come from a place of kindness, a place of, trying to help women, as opposed to saying it in such an angry, negative way. I'm like, that is not what Morphus is about. That is not what Hotflash Inc is about. So, just, be mindful of who you're surrounding yourself with.
Yes. So nice to
The energy is important.
The energy is very important. That's why I like you so much.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's why I like you too. I'm so happy we finally got to meet in person. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Make sure you follow Ann Marie. Hotflash Inc will pull all of your stuff below, and they could follow you at Hotflash Inc, right?
Yes.
On social media. So we'll put all of her information below. And thanks for listening, everyone. As always, we appreciate you, and please share, because the more you share, it shows you care. And I'll see you at the next podcast. And you can watch this on YouTube too. Bye, everyone.